Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this data reporting masterclass. My name is Kelton. I'm a sales development rep here at Wordnerds, and I'll be acting as a little bit of a conduit from you, the audience, through to our wonderful co-founder here, who I'll be introducing in just a moment. But before we get to that, there are a few things that I would like to get through. The first of those is that this webinar is for you. We want you to derive as much value as you possibly can from it. So please do get involved in the chat. If you think of any questions as we're going, throw them in there. We will do our best to answer them as we're going, or if we have a little bit of time at the end, we can get to them there as well. And also, if there's anything you noticed throughout that you would have liked to have seen, or something that you just really enjoy, we'll be sending out some feedback forms at the end too. So please do kind of let us know that way as well. So there are three things that we really want to tackle today. And well, the first of those is all about presentation. We want to walk you through kind of a method for presenting data in a way that really makes sense to the kind of big cheeses in your organization. It's really hard not to say the word kahunas when it's that big on the screen right there in front of you, but we have a shorthand for this. We call it being your CEO's best friend. And we feel very strongly about that. If you work with customer data or anything in that kind of area, then we feel very strongly that you should be staying as close as you can to your senior management team. That will be doing them a huge favor. The second thing that we want to deal with is a sort of methodology for generating and monitoring customer opinion at scale. So taking that kind of vast nebulous cloud of sort of squishy qualitative data and turning it into something that is a little bit more hard, something that you can get a grasp on and track and monitor. And the third thing is related to that, and that is taking that squishy nebulous stuff that you can track and monitor and showing it off in a quantitative form. So there's a number of ways in which we are going to kind of walk you through doing this, but I'm going to leave the explanation of all of that to the delightful and enormously tall Steve Ardal. Steve, please take it away.
I do want to say, Kelton, that I love the way you say the word kahuna. I think it was absolutely made for your accent. Doesn't work in the Scottish twang. Kahuna doesn't really create the right kind of feeling around that word, I don't think. Brilliant, thanks so much for that, Kelton. That's really useful. So in terms of what we want to achieve today, firstly, what we're trying to get you to is the point where you can take this data and present it to your organization in such a way that they will get what they want out of it. And there's four models that we use to do that. The first is understanding your why. So understanding what you want to do with that data and why you want to do it. For that, we use what we call a purpose planner. Once we've established why you want to display this data, we then look at your sources. So what sources do you have and which ones should you focus on when you're presenting? Next, we look at how you can integrate this data that you've got with your own strategic goals and the goals for your organization. And then finally, we look at the trickiest question of all of this kind of data is how you go about turning really qualitative data, so text, into quantitative, into something that you can show. And there's kind of four aspects of that that we tend to report on in order to give that to our customers. We would also love, and Kelton is standing by to hear from you, we'd also love to hear about anything else that is of would be of use to you today, any particular challenges that you have with your data. Please do let us know. Please do pop a comment into the chat with some sort of further things that challenges that you have when you're trying to show this kind of data to your team. But with that in mind, and bear in mind we started a couple minutes late, so I will go straight on to the first model, which is about understanding your why. I did want to say that all of the models we're showing today, you don't need the Wordnerds platform in order to use them. We've tried to keep these as general as possible. I know that we're lucky enough to have customers and non-customers on on this webinar today. I wanted to say up front that we're not going to be showing you how Wordnerds can do this sort of stuff for you. This is just stuff that you can do regardless of what platform you use or if you use one at all. We are obviously delighted to go further into what Wordnerds can do with any of you at any point. So starting with the why, there are generally three reasons that we find that our customers are using it, and I think these will hopefully, some of these will resonate with you. The first set of challenges are around finding and identifying and solving problems. So you might be in a situation where there are specific types of issues that really matter to your organization, and looking at how you go about solving them quickly and understanding them quickly and solving them quickly. So some people use this kind of data to put out fires in their organization. We've had Baby Bottle Company, for example, that we work with, who, it's interesting to them if they find a customer who prefers their green bottle to their pink bottle. But if they find a customer whose baby has been ill, that cranks it up to DEFCON whatever. That makes it a huge issue that they need to focus on then and there. So finding that every second counts. So that's what I mean by problems. Finding these kind of issues before they get to the point where they become a significant issue for your organization. We then have process. So some people use this kind of data to try and improve their processes. So that's generally around, if you're an organization where a lot of people spend a lot of time reading a lot of customer comments, that is obviously really useful and valuable to the individual customer, but you can't really do anything beyond that unless you start to look at how you're going to present this sort of data. So this is about saving time for your customer service professionals, and it's about allowing them to learn at scale from each other. And then finally, we look at progress, so tracking progress within your organization. That may be progress against a strategy, so there's a specific thing that your organization is trying to do, or it might be tracking against competition, so tracking against what the rest of the organizations in your space are doing. And I think that is the area that we're going to be focusing on today. It's generally the area that we find is most important when it comes to reporting, is how you go about showing your tracking your progress against your established goals.
So we've gotten a question from the crowd here, Steve, if you wouldn't mind me cutting in. They've asked, what if you want to deal with multiple purposes? Would you need multiple reports?
That's a great question. I think that there's sort of two aspects to that. The first is the attention span of your organization. So do you want to put around a really large report? Some of our customers have 100-page reports that they send around to everybody in their organization, and everybody in their, and 100 people in the organization read that report and feedback. Are there kind of more specific aspects? Are there specific things that individual parts of your team will be looking at? Generally, what we would do without knowing that is you would have a flagship report, which would focus generally on progress, and then these other bits you would have a kind of more sort of directed. So problems tend to be more specific to the person who's going to solve the problem. Whereas progress, that's something that the whole organization can get behind. Really good question. So unless there's any more questions about your why, we would then move on to the sources that you have in order to develop those kind of reports. And they generally fall into one of four categories. So the first is community. So what people out there in the world are saying about you. These are not comments that are directed at you. The things people are saying out in the world. So social media, reviews, forums, that kind of thing. Mirroring that just below it here is the competitor landscape. So all these kind of public environmental platforms, they are really great for looking at your own stuff, but they are also really great for looking at your competitor stuff. You can sit in basically all the focus groups that your competitors are having by tapping into what people are saying about them on social and reviews and so on. We then have customer data. So this is data that is directed at you. So complaints, emails, you might be producing your own kind of surveys, that kind of thing. And then commentators, we have a very lovely picture of John Motson there. I think, Kelton, you have, I'm imagining you have no idea who that person is. It's back in 1950s when I was into football. John Motson was a commentator, and that's just sort of showed the more formal ways that people are talking about you, so news articles, blogs, and that kind of thing. So we have these four groups. Apologies, probably noticed the common theme here being ridiculous amounts of alliteration, but we have these four kind of groups of places to look for sources. We then get you to write them all down. When our customers come in, we get them to write down all these kind of different sources, and we then try and work out which ones are the ones that are going to be the most useful when it comes to reporting. And we do that by mapping them according to two things. We map them according to value, so how valuable they are, how valuable each individual post is, and then volume, so how much of that data set you have. And in mapping them across those two axes, you start to see some patterns quite quickly. So, for example, if something is both low volume, you don't have very much of it, and it's not very useful, that's probably something you don't need to really look at. So you can probably ignore that, focus your energies elsewhere. Up here, you might have some data where you don't have very much of it, but the data you have is really useful. So that's often things like focus groups, where you've gone into real depth with one person or a couple of people, but that is very kind of expensive to replicate. Generally, that's where you see kind of really good, you get really good use out of qualitative insights. Down here, if you have, excuse me, down here, if you have low volume and low value, sorry, low volume and high volume and low value. So data that you've got loads of, but individually, each individual post isn't that valuable. That's where you kind of use these sort of bigger quantitative aspects, give people a flavor of what's going on there, but it's not super important. And then finally up here, I gave you a little spoiler there, we have data where you have lots of it and individually it's really valuable. And that's obviously the bit that you want to focus on and start to think about how you can use solutions to tell a story around that data. So what we then do is and this is obviously just an example, but we put that data up across, we literally do it with post-it notes on a window sometimes, put it up according to value against volume. That then gives you a kind of a framework by which to look at, these are the types of data that I'm going to really focus on when it comes to my reporting. The closer you get up to this corner, the more you have of data and the more valuable that data is individually, the more likely you are to need some sort of artificial intelligence to do that. But that gives you a sense of where you should be focusing on and the stuff that should be the centerpiece of your report.
So we've got another question in here, Steve, if you don't mind me cutting in yet again. They've asked, are those sources set in stone? And this might be something you've sort of answered already, but can you move some of those sources into the green zone? So I presume they mean, can you move like survey from Call Insights into that kind of scalable solution area?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely right. The things are absolutely not set in stone. You're always trying to move more and more stuff into that green section. So if you have a survey where you think there's really high value, how can you scale that out so that you get more of that data? And there's lots of obviously surveying tools at the moment now that can really assist with that. If you have data that you think of as low value, I think it is worth just revisiting that and thinking about, why is it low value? Is it low value intrinsically? Is it just not very interesting? Or is it low value because there's too much of it to do anything with? And can we find new ways of extracting that value? And in doing that, you can start to move this stuff up and move this stuff across, so that you get a much richer final report. Again, really good question. The next step is around your strategic goals. So understanding what really matters to your organization and building your work around that. So there's kind of, again, sort of three main places you can look there. The first is your organization will have reported on what Salim Ismail referred to as the mass transformative purpose. The thing that you're guiding, like your North Star of your organization. For some organizations, it'll be around the environment. For others, it'll be around customer, around community. All those things would be referred to as mass transformative purpose. What are the key things that your organization cares about? It's also worth looking at if you are in a regulated industry, as some of our customers are, places like Ofgem and Ofwat, where there are specific priorities that the regulator will present to you. Understanding them is also incredibly important. When you're reporting on the whole kind of scope of what's happening in the organization, bringing them back to those regulatory priorities is really important. And then finally, competitor strategic goals is also a really valuable place to look for those kind of goals that you want to achieve on, because if you can undercut your competitors within what they're trying to achieve, that's a huge advantage to you. So those are kind of the three places I'd look for strategic goals. But we're going to look into a little bit more depth on the mass transformative purpose. And Kelton, I think you're going to take us through this next exercise, which is called
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. So yes, what we're going to do now is we're going to bring up three mass transformative purposes that you may have heard of on the screen. And I'm going to ask you to get involved in the chat, post what you think, which company kind of has these as their guiding North Star objective, and we'll see who gets it first. So if we get those up on the screen now, the first of those is craft the brands and choice of drinks that people love to refresh them in body and spirit. So once more, that's craft the brands and choice of drinks that people love to refresh them in body and spirit. What do we all reckon? Let us know in the chat there. Let's see who can get it first, or indeed if anyone can get it at all. It is quite a broad one, body and spirit.
The spirit thing makes you definitely think of alcohol, or definitely makes me think of alcohol.
I mean, it's just, the pun is sitting right there, isn't it? We've got one coming in there, Budweiser. That is, maybe you gave them a little bit of a lead on there, Steve. But let's see if we can get any more guesses in before I reveal the answer, or rather Steve does. Give you a couple more seconds, enough time for me to sip for my tea.
Shall I present it?
Okay, go. Coca-Cola. Yes, well, not quite Budweiser, but choice of drinks that people love, I suppose. We can just about see where that comes from. The second one, next up, is to sustain a strong societal license to operate and make a positive contribution to society through our activities. Quite a society-focused one there, obviously, to sustain a strong societal license to operate and make a positive contribution to society through our activities. What do we reckon for that one?
I mean, again, I'm thinking licensed premises, Budweiser, surely.
Okay, I can see that you're on a particular track here, Steve. It is only Wednesday, and it is only 2:30. But, well, we'll get to Friday eventually. We're not too far off at this stage. Let's see if we can get any more guesses in the chat there before revealing that one, which I think may surprise you in a non-sort of clickbait title sort of way. All right, let's see it. What do we got for strong societal license? It's Shell, of course. What else would you think of but strong societal license to operate for Shell? So the final one here is short and sweet. No one tries harder for customers. That may well be one that if we are all in the UK in the audience here, I believe we are, but you may well have heard before. We've got a... We appreciate that. Wordnerds, we do try very hard for our customers, and I'm not going to claim that that's, doesn't apply to us. It is not, however, our mass transformative purpose. Let's see if we can get any other guesses in there before we spill the beans. Once more, opportunity to sip some tea. Sherman. Okay, well, that too, unfortunately, just about falls short. Let's see it, Steve. Who attempts to try harder for their customers than anyone else? It is Tesco. So we've picked some things out in each of these mass transformative purposes. Drinks that people love, strong societal license, and no one tries harder. There is a problem with each of these. Drinks that people love is a pretty wishy-washy metric. Love is a very challenging thing to quantitatively measure. or so they tell me. Strong societal license equally is offering up the entirety of society for kind of its approval, which, is a dicey concept at the best of kind of political times. And no one tries harder is not only an incredibly qualitative construct, it is also pitting itself, it is pitting Tesco against every other organization on the planet. So these are incredibly broad qualitative goals, and every company does seem to have them. But the problem with those qualitative constructs is that when it comes down to it, boards need numbers. Boards will demand to see numbers no matter how wonderful and qualitative your kind of end goal is. And I will just say, actually, I've never seen a board that looks like this, having quite recently graduated from university. I've only ever seen boards that look a little bit more like this. That's a little bit more like it. Cheers, Steve. But there is a way that you can solve this problem. So the question is, how do you measure quantitative progress against qualitative corporate objectives? And I'm going to pass it back to Steve now to dazzle you with his answer.
Thank you very much for that, Kelton. Prepare to be dazzled, everybody. Yes, it's a significant problem, and I think there's all sorts of different ways that we approach it at Wordnerds, between artificial intelligence and corpus linguistics and this kind of thing. But today we're looking at it from the perspective of reporting, of how you go about showing off that data in its best light. And there's kind of 4 ways that we approach that. The first is sentiment. So the first kind of broadest way we look at the data is how do the people within that data set feel? There are all sorts of tools that will do that. Some are better than others, but it's a great way of starting the process of getting really qualitative data into a numerical format, is looking at the proportion of that data set where the people seem to be happy. Once you've done that, the next thing to look at is strategy. Now, this is the mass transformative purpose stuff that we looked at earlier. If Tesco customers are trying to take Wordnerds' crown as the nobody tries harder for our customers, then understanding that, you can then look at the staff and the effort that they put into the customers, and focus on that when you're looking at this kind of data. Thirdly, we look at stories. So this is a kind of interesting area because it's naturally something that human beings are really, really drawn to. Is what we know this month we didn't know last month. So understanding what's new and different, what's changing in the data, that allows you to really make your reports more kinetic. It makes them more, it makes people want to read them with more urgency, because you have information in there that they couldn't have got from the previous report. And then finally, we call it separators, sometimes segments. This is the idea of how you compare with the rest of the market. Or if you're not in a competitive market, you might look at that as how different regions compare, or how different aspects of the business compare. Looking at one element and then comparing it to the other elements. So those are the kind of the 4 key elements that we look at when we are putting together a new report for a customer. And there's a reason we do those 4 bits, and the reason is that they each take on and are answering a different question. So sentiment is answering the question of what is going on, broadly speaking, within our customers this month. The strategy stuff is showing the how we are doing against the established corporate goals that we already knew existed. Next, we have stories, which tells us the why. So sentiment has gone down. Why is that? It'll be hidden in the stories of the customers that they're presenting to you. And then finally, the separators gives us a sense of where you are in comparison to your market. It gives you a sense of what you, the aspects of your business that are different to the organizations that surround you. So sentiment, strategy, stories, separators. Again, hugely apologies for the endless alliteration. But looking at which part of that is important to you, and to the point that was made earlier about should you do one big report or lots of little reports, this is quite an interesting way of looking at that, because if you think about the audience to your report, then the amount that you'll be using each of these things is slightly different. So it's basically, these are pulling us in some different directions. And the types of report we tend to look at are, you're either doing a report, high-level reports, so something that that people are glancing over, that it doesn't get into too much depth, or you're going for the deep dive. This is aimed at people that really care about the data, that really want to get involved in it. You then have, on the kind of the other axis, you have the difference between aiming at an operational team, so a team that's actually out there trying to solve these kind of problems, or a strategic team. So are you aiming at people that are looking to get a kind of holistic view of what's going on so that they can act more strategically at that kind of higher level? Once you have those kind of key elements, it's then very it's very easy to understand which bits of this kind of quadrant you should be prioritizing. So if you are looking at a high-level report for more kind of strategic people, you're going to focus on the strategy. You're going to be focusing on the things, how you're achieving against the corporate goals that they've already set. If, on the other hand, you are looking at an operational team and you want them to get kind of a deep dive into what's going on, you then might look at stories. You then might look at finding those kind of key, interesting things that will then send them down a rabbit hole about finding out more about. So that's how we would generally position those kind of things. To put it into a real life example, this is a report on sofas. So if you are in the market for a sofa at the moment, we've recently put out a report that looks at all the kind of major sofa providers and what people think about them. And you can see here, this is a real thing that we've made, and we're doing exactly what we're precisely using that quadrant to do it. So we start off with sentiment, the sentiment score, giving us that kind of overview of what's going on and how it's changing between the different suppliers. We're then looking at the strategic areas. So we're breaking it down by product quality, digital platform, et cetera, et cetera. So things that the market as a whole cares about. We're then looking at stories. We're picking out kind of key things that we found in the data that we think are interesting. And we are then looking at how, what kind of aspects of this data are unique to, for example, Barker & Stonehouse in comparison to the things that are unique to DFS. So we've very quickly gone from sentiment through strategy into stories and then finally to separators, which takes you very quickly from I don't know anything about Barker & Stonehouse to I've got a very clear understanding of what people feel about them, how they're doing in comparison to the others, where they sit in the market, and why that is.
So, Steve, you don't mind me cutting in here real quick. We've gotten another question in from the crowd just about, and this is something you sort of addressed earlier on, but how do you go about deriving the values that fill that report, they've asked?
Awesome, so that's a great question. So most of this is taken directly from the Wordnerds platform. So sentiment, we use a kind of a big neural network to establish sentiment that we've kind of trained. The way in which we've broken down the strategy piece is again through what we refer to as Big Bird, which is something that allows you to train AI to go and look for whatever you're interested in. This stuff down here, this is, and up here, these are topics which are completely unsupervised in our platform. So they are entirely, in this instance, that's just what the data will bear for those things. So that's how we've done these specific things. If you don't have access to the Wordnerds platform, I think most platforms will have a facsimile of themes, so the kind of the way in which they've broken the data down, and obviously sentiment. For the uniqueness, so for how finding the topics that are unique to each one, again, we use a kind of a calculation to establish that. An easy way to do that is obviously through word counting. So if you don't have access to any platform, then come out with a directory of words that will allow you to, that for you kind of refer to a specific topic. You'll be able to use that way. But all this data here is, it's brought through from the Wordnerds platform. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that question. It's really, really useful. And I'm conscious we're running a little bit over. I'm going to pass back to Kelty, who's going to talk you through what we're going to do next and what we'd like you to do.
Great. So thank you again, Steve, so much for all that. I just wanted to let you know now that, as I mentioned before, we are looking for any and all feedback that you do have for us. So in just a moment, I'm going to pop in the chat a link where you can follow and give us a little bit of feedback. And further, perhaps more importantly for you, you can indicate to us what kind of gift you would like to receive. So we have two options for you here. The first of those is you can receive an example of one of those SOFA reports, those kind of one-pager top-level reports we were talking about. So you can take a look at the format and see how you might fill that with your relevant data. Alternatively, we can send you over the couple of documents we use to actually create it, the behind-the-scenes stuff, as you like, as a sort of spreadsheet where you put in all of your data, and then a kind of one-page format report that you can kind of copy all that data into. So please do let us know. I'm just kind of throwing that link in the chat now. Follow that through. There will be a little tick box there in addition to a couple of other questions that you can answer if you like. And once again, if you do have any more questions, please do put them in the chat now. But if not, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.